Hello and welcome to Station 5 of the Via Dolorosa, the 14 Stations of the Cross. Today it's Jesus judged by Pilate, and our text is taken from Luke chapter 23. Pontius Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was perverting the people. And here I have examined him in your presence, and have not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither has King Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him." And then they all shouted together, "Away with this fellow! Release Barabbas for us!" This was a man who had been put in prison for an insurrection that had taken place in the city and for murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why, what evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him." But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. Take a look at this painting, 1881, Mihaly Moncasi. Pilate allegedly listening to the complaints against Jesus. Another painting from about the same period, Antonio Cesari. Ecce Homo, he's presenting Jesus. Behold the man, presenting Jesus to the public. On what should we meditate here at the fifth station of the 14 Stations of the Cross, Jesus before Pontius Pilate? Should we remember Pilate as having washed his hands, so he's not responsible for what's going on? Should we remember Pilate for asking what is truth? Should we remember Pilate for presenting Jesus, ecce homo? It's interesting what Pastor Mark Roberts suggests. He works hard in his reflection to demonstrate that Pilate was not an innocent little victim of Jewish bullying. Oh no, Pilate really wanted Jesus dead and was just fooling the crowd into making it appear that that's what they wanted, and that he would be a defender of Jesus's innocence. Now, Pastor Roberts' motivation is very clear. He tells us that there's an ugly chapter in the history of the Christian church where a number of people have blamed the Jews, calling Jews Christ killers, and this is justified prejudice and bias and even violence against our Jewish brothers and sisters. And we want to eliminate any kind of Christian anti-Semitism. We must eliminate that. So Pastor Roberts is right on that point. And he thinks that if we can put a large percentage of the guilt on the shoulders of Pontius Pilate, then that relativizes, so to speak, the Jewish contribution to this incident. My own position is that what we learn as we look at the Jewish Sanhedrin, what we learn from Pontius Pilate, what we learn from history is that we in the human race behave like this. And there is no good reason to single out either Jews or Romans or any other group of people for some kind of special contribution here. And the last thing we want to do is provide any justification for contemporary anti-Semitism. If anything, the Christians should bind themselves in shared victimage with our Jewish brothers and sisters during this period, which anti-Semitism has once again reared its ugly head. There is no justification in this story for that, none. The discussion of Pontius Pilate reminds me a lot of contemporary politics. On the one hand, Roberts rightly says Pilate has got all the authority to execute a criminal, and Pilate also has the job of putting down insurrections, potential revolts. He has to keep the peace, so to speak. And so if he's going to crucify Jesus, it's sort of a feather in his bonnet to think that he is doing it in order to obey the will of the people. In contemporary politics, Karen and I sit in front of the television. Doesn't matter whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or Independents. We know that when we hear the phrase, and the American people want X, that's one of the two biggest phrases. One is the American people want, and then the second one is fight. I fight for what the American people want. And I holler out in the room, ballyhoo, ballyhoo, and Karen gives me the elbow and says, shut up and listen. Well, I don't want to listen to that ballyhoo. It's vacuous. And it strikes me Pilate was trying to cultivate material for his own ballyhoo here. Be that as it may, theologically what we're learning here is that Pilate, in carrying out his responsibilities as a political leader, wreaks injustice against the innocent Jesus. Jesus is put to death unjustly. He's not guilty of the crime of blasphemy, and he's not guilty of the crime of insurrection against the Roman government either. Jesus is a scapegoat that binds together the Jewish and the Roman leadership by sacrificing Jesus. They have a good reason to develop a relationship across the aisle in contemporary language. And this reveals the depth of human sin understood as alienation from God and from God's kingdom, because in the name of justice, the innocent get put to death. I think that's what we ought to think about here at Station 5. And let's not cut our political leaders any slack on this. Oh yes, they do have dilemmas. But when they wash their hands and try to blame others for what was their responsibility, well, that's what it's like to be estranged and alienated from God's kingdom. Well, let's turn to the prayer that Pastor Roberts has given us. Dear Lord, you know how easy it is for me to be like Pilate. I don't like to take responsibility for my failures. I find rationalization to be so neutral, so natural. I can fool myself into thinking that I haven't really done wrong. So forgive me, Lord, when I follow the way of Pilate. Help me to acknowledge my sins, both to myself and to you, rather than wallowing in my pointless excuses and defenses. By your Spirit, guide me to see clearly where I have missed your mark, so that I might confess truly and fully. Help me to experience the forgiveness you offer in Christ, and to live in the freedom of the cleansing you alone provide. Amen. That is Station 5. Tomorrow, Station 6.